It is deeply troubling that the Canadian Chief of Defence Staff has had to step down only a month after assuming command.
There is a problem of leadership which is being shown by this situation.
I can assure you and all Canadians that I would never turn a blind eye to anything like this. We will investigate every allegation to making sure there's a fair process in this. We want people to come forward with any allegation, and it will be taken seriously.
Political reaction today in response to Canada's top military commander, Admiral Art McDonald, stepping aside because of sexual misconduct allegations. This just weeks after we learned the former Chief of the Defence Staff is also being investigated over claims of inappropriate behaviour. So what does this tell us about the appointment process, the military, and the potential political damage here? It's Thursday, and I'm here with that issue. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and Althea Raj. Andrew, why don't we start with you? We learned it initially came out last night, but we've since learned from our reporting that the allegations come from an incident a decade ago aboard a ship involving a female crew member. Alcohol was involved. How big an issue is this? Let's start with, obviously, for the government in terms of accountability.
Not necessarily huge. I mean, one of the questions that I suppose people will want to know is who knew about this? How long did anybody in the government know about it? This, with Admiral McDonald, seems to have come more out of the blue, whereas I think there were some questions about General Vance as to whether he was, whether something was known about his alleged misconduct. So I think it's the question of who knew what when that is the most bedeviling. Beyond that, you know, I'm not sure what lessons can be drawn for the government at this point.
Althea, what do you think in terms of how the government wears this, given that in this case this was their specific choice? Case of Vance, it was the choice of the previous government.
Well, they're not saying anything. So it always makes you wonder what it is that they're exactly hiding. And I think what they're unwilling to describe really is the vetting process. So it seems, if you look at the timeline, so Murray Brewster suggests that this investigation started around the time that the Admiral was sworn in, which would be around January 14th, but he was announced on December 23rd. So did somebody come forward with allegations after he was announced? You don't expect the government to ask every single person that somebody was in contact with, you know, did anything happen at this time? If there's nothing in the HR file, if there is nothing that is immediately flagged, if there's no ongoing investigation, you know, there are obviously limits to how far back the government and the PCO would be looking at somebody's record. But you do expect them to act, and you do expect them to be transparent. And it doesn't seem like they are being transparent and that they're not willing to answer those simple questions about what goes into the vetting process or who knows what when. And it doesn't help the fact that, unfortunately, the defense minister, very nice person, but a terrible communicator. And when you have moments of crisis like this, you want somebody who has earned the trust of people or who can earn the trust of people. And Minister Sajjan is just really unable to communicate clearly.
They are saying that they can't answer any of these questions, Chantal, because there is an investigation both into the recent former Chief of Defence Staff and the other one, too.
The general questions about the vetting process, they can answer. But I agree that the specifics, no, because a fair process is for both parties.
Right.
And on that basis, it's really hard to see how much you can say. Even if you're a great communicator, there are a number of facts or unproven facts or whatever that need to be investigated in a court other than that of public opinion, the media, or a parliamentary committee. That being said, I agree with Althea. It's impossible for the government to not act on recommendations rather than investigate the entire national defense apparatus and the armed forces from the top down.
Sure.
I'm not totally surprised. There has been a culture shift over the past 30 years on issues like this, and people who are appointed to senior positions have gone through the armed forces in a different culture. It's totally possible that skeletons that do not make HR reports remain in some people's closets.
Okay, let's turn to the other sort of big news of the week politically, and that was the meeting, obviously, by the President and the Prime Minister, a virtual meeting, obviously not what anyone really wanted. They wanted to be able to hang out together, but let me play a clip of Joe Biden this week, and we can talk about what it did for the relationship.
Let me reiterate our support for the release of the detained detained in China, 2 Canadians. Human beings are not bartering chips. You know, we're going to work together until we get their safe return.
Obviously, that issue, China, top of mind to the government here, because they believe that the United States can really help to free Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. Andrew, did you... did enough come out of that meeting in terms of both governments getting what they needed from one another, or were there things there that worried you as potential roadblocks down the road?
Not much of either. I mean, I don't think we should invest too much expectations or hopes in a first meeting. These are mostly for people to get acquainted with each other, to try and get some momentum going, try and get lock down some agreements on things in broad strokes. But you're not going to see major changes in policy or in agreements between the two countries in any particular sense. So I wouldn't be too despondent that you didn't see that happening. And I wouldn't read too much into the fact that they seem to get along very well. You would hope after the last 4 years that they would. Things could only get better from where they were. But the job of the Prime Minister is not to be the President's pal. He's to represent the Canadian interests. And if he has to, in subsequent meetings, get in the President's face about things like Buy American or things like sharing vaccines, he's got to be prepared to draw down some of the capital that he might have built up in those initial meetings.
So we're not looking for a second bromance, Althea. That's maybe not what Justin Trudeau should be going for here.
Well, I don't know. I don't even actually know that there was really a bromance with Barack Obama. I think the same leaders are simpatico in the same way, Trudeau and Biden, than Trudeau and Obama. The real measure of whether or not you're pals will come when you make an ask that is difficult for the other side to do, and they decide to do it because they either value the relationship that they've built with you, like you change their response in a way that they wouldn't naturally respond. And we haven't seen that yet. Frankly, they avoided some of the pitfalls. I mean, you just aired that clip of the president talking about the 2 Michaels, but Marc Garneau, the Foreign Affairs Minister, was on the current CBC Radio's program this week and said that there was actually no specifics discussed. And I'm told that there was no specific ask made from the Prime Minister to the President on this file. So if you're just talking in terms of vague generalities, and it's great that he mentioned it, but you're not asking him to actually do anything to move this case forward, that to me is not a win. And we saw that they basically avoided the topic of Buy American. You know, you're either avoiding the topic because you know the answer is going to be negative, or you're avoiding the topic because you don't need change to happen. And in this case, either it's the vaccines or Buy American. Like Buy American, they briefly talked about it. Basically, the Canadian side will readily admit, so they could put it in their communique. And on the vaccines, they didn't mention it.
But is that, Chantal, to Andrew's point, the fact that you can't, those first meetings, you don't get all that stuff done? I mean, how much should we have expected from that meeting?
So this is what normal looks like. It's not exciting. It doesn't produce great headlines. And that is actually, to many Canadians, more reassuring than the absence of the great headlines. Thank you. 4 years of them. I'm not sure I remember very many public asks where the other side in this relationship gave up something in the past. Certainly not on participating on the war on Iraq, to name those, because when you have an ask and the other side gives up something, you don't make it public.
Right.
You don't go out and say, look what I won. That would be Donald Trump doing the Canada-U.S. relationship. So they are better aligned. What I hope for is that over the Trump 4 years, we did kind of fade the focus on the White House and Prime Minister relationship to expand our efforts and build alliances in Congress, on Capitol Hill. And I think that lesson should remain as part of the way we operate.
Thank you again for stepping up in such a big way on tackling climate change. U.S. leadership has been sorely missed over the past years, and I have to say, as we're preparing the joint rollout and communique from this one, it's nice when the Americans are not pulling out all references to climate change and instead adding them in.
So definitely a different tone between Justin Trudeau and Joe Biden after 4 years of Donald Trump. Chantal, Andrew, and Althea all here for an extended round at the panel. I want to talk about that comment because to me, it was probably one of the more revealing moments for the Prime Minister in terms of his relationship with Donald Trump. Andrew, what did you and the dog, you can hear in the background, glean from that comment there?
Well, I mean, Chantal said in the previous segment that we're back to something resembling normalcy. We're always going to have issues with either a Republican or a Democratic president. They're not always going to be wanting to do us favors. But with Biden, we can at least predict what he's going to do based on some kind of rational calculus, either domestic politics or his own deep convictions. But it's not just going to be, whims and fits of pique as it was under Donald Trump. It also means a return to normalcy in the sense that we are back to the Washington game being our big foreign policy game. I mean, you go back 4 years, the Liberal government was still in the throes of its infatuation with China as the next hegemon and was very preoccupied with trying to basically contain Trump. Now we're back to a situation where we're actually trying to contain China, and we really need to maximize the relationship with Washington, not just for its own sake, but because one of the cards Canada can play in international councils in general is the degree to which we are thought to have influence and sway with the administration in Washington. So it's back to a much more traditional foreign policy focus. Yeah,
that's an astute observation about how things have flipped with China and the United States. Althea, how did you read the Prime Minister's tone there in terms of, I guess, just being relieved about what is happening now?
Yeah. He said, I have to say. No, he didn't have to say. In fact, he should not have said. It's immature, and these are the types of things that you put in your inside voice and that you don't verbalize, especially if you're a world leader. There was absolutely nothing gained from him saying that. And who knows, we might have Donald Trump again in 4 years. So maybe dial that back.
Except
you have to work with Republicans in Congress. There's just, why would you inject something so petty? And he could have phrased that in a more constructive tone in terms of I'm so thrilled to see a renewed commitment to climate action coming from Washington, D.C. But no, he just had to make it personal.
Well, he had to keep his mouth shut for about 4 years. There was only that Buckingham Palace slip up, and then this one, Chantal.
Yes, Donald Trump may be back in 4 years. Who knows whether Justin Trudeau will still be
that's right. That's
there
true.
for another round with Donald Trump. But I think beyond, and I don't disagree that it was undiplomatic, but beyond that, it is the first time in a decade that the U.S. administration and the Canadian government, subject to the next election, are paired on climate change, that they're looking together in the same direction. Obama, Harper, not quite, and then Trump, Trudeau, the opposite, but not at all. So the emphasis on climate change, I do believe there is the potential of something that could change the paradigm on the debate on climate change and how we address it in North America, because those two governments are more aligned than they have been in a decade.
Well, okay, so if we take that point a little bit further, Andrew, what does that mean then for domestic politics here? If you see a potential continental approach to climate change and you have a Conservative Party that has yet to accept the idea of a carbon pricing system, what does it do for this country?
Well, I can see where you're going with that question. You're absolutely right. It makes it more and more of a fait accompli. It makes it less and less likely it would be reversed, or that anybody in the business community, for example, would be wanting it to be reversed. It takes away, if we do get a continental carbon tariff, and we're a long way from that, but if we do, then that takes away some of the competitiveness arguments. We are told that people around Erin O'Toole would like, if they could, to get out of this box that they put themselves in. I think they're acquiring more and more reasons to do so as with each passing week.
Yeah, I wonder whether it doesn't make it more palatable for the Conservative Party, Althea. I don't know. Maybe not. Chantal's shaking her head, but you go first, Althea.
No. Go ahead, Chantal. It's fine.
Go ahead, Chantal. Go ahead.
I just think that they kind of burnish this position so much for an opposition leader who does not have total control so far over the party, that while it is inevitable, I'm not sure that Erin O'Toole will be able to be the leader who does that.
Okay, Althea.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think if Erin O'Toole suddenly decided to embrace a carbon tax, as Jenny Burns was suggested last week, I think the Maverick Party, or whatever the newest name of it is, might get more support in Alberta and Saskatchewan than we think. I think there is great potential for Canada and the U.S. to work together, but it does seem like the Americans actually feel like they want to do their own plan, and it's great if Canada is on side with parts of it. And the challenge for Canadians is to try to inject ourselves into that conversation, whether it's supply chains, whether it's, like the cobalt refinery in Northern Ontario, or how can we be useful to the U.S. while further integrating our economy is basically the challenge that is facing the Trudeau cabinet at this moment.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.